Okay, so this case involved Otis McDonald and the city of Chicago, and it was argued on March 2nd, 2010. So it was actually pretty recent. And Otis McDonald filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court to challenge the provisions of the 1982 Chicago law. And this law banned the new registration of handguns and made registration a prerequisite of possession of a firearm. And multiple following lawsuits about the possession of handguns and firearms all allege that the laws violated the right to carry weapons. But just some more background on Otis. So he joined the Army after dropping out of high school, and after he served, he got a job as a janitor, and then he later worked his way up to a maintenance engineer. But he retired by the time he filed his case, and he and his family didn't live in the safest area, and he was 76 at the time, so he knew he wouldn't be able to physically protect his family very well, which is why he wanted a handgun. And so he insisted he needed to shield his family from gangs and drug dealers in their neighborhood. And his reasons were actually very valid because his house had been broken into 5 times prior. And he was also an experienced hunter, so he already had guns legally. He had shotguns, but he wanted a handgun because he thought that it would be better for robbery. So he wanted a handgun, but handguns were illegal because of the Chicago law. And so he joined 3 other Chicago residents in filing a lawsuit. So one of the main issues that McDonald brought up in his case was that in the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment is the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And while there was debate what it exactly means, in McDonald's case, he just wanted to challenge a few aspects of Chicago's handgun ban so that he could legally own a handgun and get the registration he needed to qualify for one, as well as remove the mandates on guns to be re-registered annually and the fees that came with them. And the 14th Amendment is that the states shall not deprive anyone of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. He claimed that the handgun law violated the 14th Amendment. And so the 14th Amendment was used to make the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, applicable to state and local governments when it was usually just on federal cases. So there's an example of selective incorporation. And this is because the right to bear arms is implicitly stated in the Constitution under the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment, and it's a fundamental part of the civil liberties because it applies to individuals. So the 14th Amendment was used to make the Second Amendment applicable to state and local governments.
Now let's get to some of the facts of the case. When Otis McDonald initially made his case, it was actually dismissed by the district court, so he appealed to the Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit. The 7th Circuit reaffirmed the district court's dismissal of the case and said Heller dealt with a law enacted under the authority of the national government. The Supreme Court granted certiorari, which is a right or order in which a higher court reviews the decision of a lower court. Arguments were heard on March 2nd, 2010, and the ruling of the case ended in a 5-4 decision, with the Supreme Court ruling that the 14th Amendment makes the Second Amendment right to bear arms for the purpose of self-defense applicable to the states. There were some Supreme Court justices that did dissent in the case. Justice John Paul Stevens dissented and disagreed that the 14th Amendment incorporated the Second Amendment against the states and argued that owning a firearm was a liberty interest that was protected by due process. Judges Stephen G. Breyer, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Sonia Sotomayor also dissented and argued that there is nothing in the Second Amendment that characterizes the situation as a fundamental right that requires the 14th Amendment. Some other cases that involve this is the District of Columbia v. Heller, which is the precedent for the entire case as discussed in the facts of the case. It was a debate over a handgun ban in 2008 in the District of Columbia, and it was ruled that the District of Columbia is subject to unique constitutional status because it is not a state and only has federal laws from Constitution to regard. Another case is Duncan v. Louisiana, and the Supreme Court incorporated a provision of the Bill of Rights making it applicable to state and local governments. At the time, the right to jury trial for criminal cases was only guaranteed in federal cases. Duncan appealed to the Supreme Court to extend the Sixth Amendment, which it was the right to a jury, to also be applicable for state and local crimes. This cartoon is also applicable to McDonald versus Chicago because instead of having a long and detailed description of the bill, it only instead says arms. This shows that the people who wrote the Bill of Rights thought that the Bill of Rights would mean the same in the future as it did then. This shows that government documents like the Bill of Rights have changed interpretation over time based on the circumstances that surround that interpretation.
This political cartoon is poking fun at the NRA's use of the Second Amendment to protect not necessarily the right of the people to keep and bear arms, but more to protect the firearm industry and limit gun regulations and restrictions. And the NRA is doing this to protect people's freedom, but it is causing unregulated masses of armed citizens whose actions are infringing on other individuals and their liberties.